August 27th, 1985. Sarah and Theo. And it's nothing really, or might be nothing, or ought to be nothing, as he leans his head forward to press the tip of his cigarette to the car's lighter. It sizzles on contact, a sound particular to its brief moment in history in which cars have lighters and otherwise sensible 15-year-olds choke down Marlboro Reds and drive their mother's Buicks without so much as a learner's permit. There's a girl he wants to impress. Her name is Misty Zimmerman, and if she lives through this night, she will grow up to be a magazine editor or a high school teacher or a defense lawyer. She will be a mother of 3 or remain childless. She will die young of ovarian cancer or live to know her great-grandchildren. But these are only a few possible arcs to a life, a handful of shooting stars in the night sky. Change one thing and everything changes. A tremor here sets off an earthquake there, a fault line deepens, a wire gets tripped, his foot on the gas. He doesn't really know what he's doing, but that won't stop him. He's all jacked up, just like a 15-year-old boy. He has something to prove, to himself, to Misty, to his sister. It's as if he's following a script written in Braille, his fingers running across code he doesn't understand. Theo, slow down. That's his sister Sarah from the back seat. Misty's riding shotgun. It was Sarah who tossed him the keys to their mom's car. Sarah, age 17. After this night, she will become unknowable to him. The summer sky is a veil thrown over the moon and stars. The streets are quiet. The good people of Avalon long since tucked in for the night. Their own parents are asleep in their queen-size bed under the plaid afghan knitted by one of their father's patients. His mom is a deep sleeper, but his dad has been trained by a lifetime as a doctor to bolt awake at the slightest provocation. He is always ready. The teenagers aren't looking for trouble. They're good kids, everyone would say so. But they're bored. It's the end of summer. School will resume next week. Sarah's going into her senior year, after which she'll be gone. She's a superstar, his sister. Varsity this, honors that, bristling with potential. Theo has 3 years left and he's barely made a mark. He's a chubby kid whose default is silence and shame. He blushes easily. He can feel his cheeks redden as he holds the lighter and inhales, hears the sizzle, draws smoke deep into his lungs. His father, a pulmonary surgeon, would kill him. Maybe that's why Sarah threw him the keys. Maybe she's trying to help, to get him to act, goddammit, to take a risk. Better to be bad than to be nothing. Misty Zimmerman is just a girl along for the ride. It was Sarah who asked her to come. Sarah doing for Theo what Theo cannot do for himself. Change one thing and everything changes. The Buick speeds down Poplar Street. Misty stretches and yawns in the passenger seat. Theo turns left, then right. He's getting the hang of this. He flicks the directional, then heads onto the parkway. As they pass the mall, he looks to see if Burger King is still open. Watch it, Sarah yells. He swerves back into his lane, heart racing. He almost hit the guardrail. He gets off the parkway at the next exit and eases up on the gas. This was maybe a bad idea. He wants to go home. He also wants another cigarette. Pull over, Sarah says. I'll drive. Theo looks for a good spot to stop. He has no idea how to park. Sarah's right, this is stupid. Actually, no, forget it, I shouldn't, she says. They're almost home. It's like a song in his head. Almost home, almost home, almost home. Just a few blocks to go. They pass the Heller's house, the Chertoffs. As he leans forward, the lighter slips through Theo's fingers and drops into his open shirt collar. He lets out a yelp and tries to grab it, which only makes matters worse. He arches his back to shake the burning metal thing loose, but it's wedged between his shorts and his belly. The smell of singed flesh. A perfect, shiny half moon will remain. Years from now, when a lover traces the scar on his stomach and asks how he got it, he will roll away. But now their futures shoot like gamma rays from the moving car. 3 high school kids. What if Sarah had gone out with her friends instead that night? What if Misty had begged off? What if Theo had succumbed to his usual way of being and fixed himself a salami sandwich with lots of mustard and taken it with him to bed? The wheel spins, the screams of teenagers in the night. Theo, no, Jesus, fuck, help, God, and there is no screech of brakes, nothing to blunt the impact. A concussion of metal and an ancient oak, the sound of 2 worlds colliding. The fender and right side of the Buick crumble like it's a toy and this is all make-believe. Upstairs on the 2nd floor of Benjamin and Mimi Wilf's home, a light blinks on, a window opens. Ben Wilf stares down at the scene below for a fraction of a second. By the time he's made it to the front door, his daughter Sarah is standing before him. Thank God, thank God, thank God. Her t-shirt and her face splattered with blood. Theo is on all 4s on the ground. He seems to be in one piece. Thank God, thank God, thank God. But then, there's a girl in the car, Dad. I'm gonna stop there. I always feel like I should apologize to people for that reading, but
different reverence maybe than other people do, because, and also I read almost only memoir from you. And so the idea, I have a bunch of questions. I bet there are things that perhaps you guys are curious about too, I hope so. But, so you have a very popular podcast called Family Secrets. Are you guys familiar with it? Yeah. How many views?
how many views?
Yeah.
Downloads.
That's what they say. What do the kids say? The downloads. What are they?
36 million?
Okay. So all that says to me is there might be some family secrets out in the world that people are interested in family secrets, and I don't know a family that I know well that doesn't have at least one, and it's the thing that no one talks about, so we don't know because we don't get to be in another family.
Right.
This book, this beautiful, beautiful, complex book is about, it's not about a family secret, but there is this, I feel like it is bound by a family secret, and it impacts all of these, are there 8 characters, 9 characters?
7, yeah.
Yeah, more than 5
Yeah.
characters, and it's 2 families. It's the Wilfs, not the Milfs, the Wilfs. And
That never occurred to me until you just.
I was like, what does that stand for? And so what I was wanting to know is, it centers around this long-kept family secret, a secret that the family has made this unspoken pact to keep secret, and the way this secret affects their lives, because change one thing, change everything, and how it affects everyone differently depending on what their role in the family is and that burden that they have to bear. So first of all, I want to know when you had the time to write this novel, because at last I checked, you had just written Inheritance, and that was right before the pandemic, because I remember when you came to my house and told me about your discovery. Shortly thereafter, Inheritance was born fast. I think it was a very quick birth. And then the pandemic happened, and then you wrote this tome, this complex, I don't know if it's a mandala, but it feels like it is a very elaborate tapestry that does not feel like it comes out in one piece, I can't imagine. And so my question is, how did you, first of all, find the time to write this complex a book? Because in the book is a pandemic and Y2K. And so that's my question.
Okay. My dad who raised me was not my biological father, and that I was the family secret. I had been writing about family secrets. I knew that there were family secrets. I felt that I had grown up in a house full of secrets, but I didn't know that I was the secret.
I've never heard you say it that way. Do you say that way in the book and all the time? Because
No, I
I've
think
never
I'm
heard you
just,
say that.
well, I don't think I would speak that way over coffee.
But we talk so much about it, but that is such a
But there's a
big deal.
line in Inheritance, which is, I always knew there was a secret. What I didn't know, the secret was me. So I started And the podcast came out of the fact that I was writing this book about my own family secret, and people started telling me stories about their family secrets, and it was very organic the way it happened.
And you kept very busy during the pandemic.
And before the pandemic, I mean, it's one of my full-time jobs, is the podcast. It's going into its 9th season, which the trailer dropped today, and the 9th season drops in a week. Anyway, in terms of how I found the time to write this book, this was a very hard-won book. I started it 15 years ago.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
I wrote 100 pages. It was the first fiction I had written in a while. It was after my memoir Devotion had come out, and these characters appeared to me. I knew them. All of them were very clear to me. And I was committed to this structure, which was that I was going to tell this story backward in time. So I wrote a chunk of the book, a chunk of a manuscript that took place on one night in the year 2010, in which we meet some of the characters. We meet all of the characters, really. And then I wrote the next chunk of the book, which took place on one night of New Year's Eve, Y2K New Year's Eve, 1999, when we all thought the world was going to end. I mean, which I just think is so adorable now when I think about it. We were.
So wacky. Just
Right,
spooky.
right.
Yeah.
So I had written these 2 sections that were 10 years apart, and that's when I came to understand that my idea for the way it was structured was deeply and impossibly flawed. Because if I kept on moving backward, the baby who had just been born on New Year's Eve of 1999, who was my favorite character in the book, would not be alive yet, and that creates narrative problems that I was not up for, unless I wanted to get all metaphysical and just keep on moving backward, and that wasn't the kind of book I wanted to write. So I actually really had confidently, like, sort of issued forth into this structure that had me go right into a wall. And I was committed to the structure. I was sort of wedded to it. And so the book went into a drawer, and it stayed in a drawer. And I was so sad about it, because I really loved these characters and I really loved the work that I was doing, but I didn't have it. And so it went into a drawer, and I went back to work. I wrote Still Writing. Still Writing wouldn't have existed if that hadn't happened. Then I wrote Hourglass. Then I made the discovery about my dad. Then I wrote Inheritance. Then the pandemic happened. And many other things happened in between that were like big life things. And in the early days of the pandemic, I was cleaning up my office closet one day, like literally Marie Kondoing thing, like just kind of got tired of baking sourdough bread and was just in there. And there was this neat pile of pages, actual pages, on one of the, because apparently I put it in my closet and not a drawer. And there was the manuscript, and something just whispered in my ear, just reread this, read this. It's been years and years and years.
How long had it been since you'd even looked at it?
Since I put it in the drawer.
Never looked at it?
No, it was
even in between jobs?
No, it was the one that got away. It just was the one that got away. And so I sat down in the middle of the mess in my office and I read it. And 2 things happened. One was I really liked it, which doesn't usually happen to me with work that's really old. I don't think, I usually feel like I've grown as a writer and that this is earlier work, but this time I really thought, wow. It was almost like I was reading somebody else's work because it had been so long. And as a writer, letting something really go cold on you, I mean, that I advise students to do that all the time, but usually I mean, I don't know, a month, not decades. And the other thing that happened was I thought, and now it's 2020. So I had written 2 chunks of this book that were 10 years apart, and now it was 10 years later. And what animated me and kind of just spurred me to know, I mean, there was just, I wasn't grasping at it, it was this deep knowing that this was it. And and now it's 2020, and the thought was, who would they have become? So my 11-year-old boy character, who I loved so much, this character named Waldo Shankman, well, he'd be 21, so he'd probably be, and he's brilliant, and he was very, he's obsessed with the cosmos and the stars, so he's probably at Berkeley in college. He would have gone as far away from Westchester as he could possibly get, and he would have to come home, and home was not a happy place for him, you know, so what would that be? And then I thought about another character, Theo, who you met in those opening pages, who grows up to become a chef with an improbable amount of success and with this very small restaurant in Brooklyn that becomes like the table that everybody wants to book. And Theo would be, and Theo is also someone for whom cooking for people is love. He can't really relate, you know, he has trouble connecting, and he'd be in the absolute center of the first wave of the pandemic. What would Theo do? And so the question of like, what would these characters do, got me just completely fired up, but I also didn't want to write a pandemic novel. We were living it. I didn't want to read it. I didn't think that it was possible to have any perspective on it. You know, it was I wanted it to be like a sliver of time that would allow the reader, and me, to see what would become of these people later, so that we can tolerate Waldo's unhappy, lonely childhood with a father who doesn't understand him, and a passive mother, and this brilliant boy who, you know, is so out of step with his peers. We can tolerate that, or more than tolerate that. We can be with him because we have this little window shade that goes up, and then we get a glimpse of, oh, he's gonna be okay, you know. And there are several places like that in the book that were, for me, so satisfying to write, because it's just, maybe there's 15, not even, probably there's 10 pages in the whole book that take place in 2020, but they are, and they're sort of peppered throughout. I understood that structure that I had started with of the backward in time, that it needed to be upended, and it needed to be, you used the word mandala, I love that. It needed to be, you know, this mosaic, this puzzle, this.
That's what it feels like.
And one last thing about that, which is that.
But it also has a spiritual depth of a mandala as
Yeah,
well.
thank you.
Because it has like the tiles that you would see in an ancient temple. That's what I mean when I say that.
And pattern, right? And like what belongs.
Get the chills. Look, my whole face just got goosebumps. Yes, that's what you made. You made that.
The other thing is that in the so cute. The other piece of that is that in the ensuing years of those years from when I started and when I came back to it, a number of things happened. I learned, I know so much more about secrets than I did when I started. I know so much more about life than I did when I started. But I had been, in terms of craft, really kind of honing. I became really interested in writing in this fractured way. It started with devotion, which is, when I was writing devotion, I thought, I'm writing a book that no one is going to read, because it's told in these tiny little pieces, and I just thought, who's going to read a book that's told in these tiny little pieces?
People with ADHD.
Well, you can read a little bit, you can put it down. Exactly. As it turns out, it's a great strategy. It wasn't a strategy, but it was, but I started exploring that, and then I wrote more in essay form, and then ultimately my memoir, Hourglass, which is completely like a kaleidoscope. And I wanted to play with time, because we are trapped in time. We live in time. We're gonna all leave here an hour older than we were when we walked in. We are moving forward in time, but it's not how we live within ourselves. We contain multitudes, and the leaning into the past, the anxiety about the future, when we walk around, our emotional and internal lives are kind of a jumble of, they're not memory. God, is not chronological. And I wanted to explore that and to find a way. It's the way I love to work now. And so being able to return to this material with having honed that craft over those years.
And those books teaching you.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Exactly.
That's
I've read
really
Signal Fires. You might think that I had created the character of Ben Wilf based on my biological father, who is called Ben Walden in Inheritance. That's the pseudonym I gave him.
I never made that. Did you guys? I didn't. I've met.
Good. Some did and some didn't. But here's the thing. I wrote that character of Benjamin Wilf 6 years before I knew that I had a different biological father than my dad. And when I went back to the manuscript, I never once thought that. Like, we're like artists and writers are the last to know. Like, we're the last to know. And so I didn't even go back and think, oh, Ben W. So Ben Wilf, or Ben Walden, and now Ben Wilf, but Ben Wilf preceded Ben Walden, and they both are Ben W's, and I didn't even think about that. You know, if I had, I might have considered changing the name, because it just would have, but I went back to this book in which I have this character who is a doctor. He's a pulmonologist. He has a certain physicality and manner and disposition and ways of speaking. He's a lover of poetry. He's kind and a little also has a kind of reticence to him. So I finished the book. I just go back to work, and I finished the book and I gave it to my son as one of my very first readers. And my son came into my office, was holding the manuscript in his hands, and he said, "Mom, he's just like him." Meaning his biological grandfather, my biological father. And as soon as he said it, I thought, he is. You're right. It was the most, where do our characters come from? Like, there was something that will remain mystical and mysterious to me forevermore, because I did not change. Every word that you read in those opening 100 pages of Signal Fires, with the exception of one character, Sarah, who I rethought, which we can talk about maybe, but those are what I wrote in 2011.
Wow. Yeah. Would you like to talk about Sarah?
Sure. I mean, in terms of rethinking Sarah, the one thing that in going back into it, Sarah had been, when I first started writing the book, a Hollywood wife. She was married to a very successful Hollywood producer. She was equally miserable. She was self-destructive in all the same ways, but she was, doing yoga, and she was a cliche. So, and I recognized that she was a cliche. It was actually one of the things that was hard for me about the initial pages, was that I knew I hadn't figured her out. And when I went back in, I thought, oh, no, Sarah needs to be a badass. Sarah needs to have her own agency. Sarah needs to be the Hollywood producer. And I wanted both kids, Sarah and Theo, who are so haunted and whose lives are so formed in so many ways by the event that I read you all, and the fact that there were no visible consequences from it. This was a family in the 1980s, a white family, a privileged family, a family where the father was the local doctor that everybody knew. So
Trusted.
Was anybody breathalyzed? Was anybody questioned? It didn't really make sense, but there were no consequences. But the invisible consequences were profound and shape their, you know, a guest on my podcast recently said, I think the smartest thing about, or most trenchant thing about secrets that I have heard yet, and I've read a lot about secrets, she said, when you bury a secret, you bury it alive. And that, so this was alive within all of the Wilfs, but primarily Sarah and Theo, and I wanted them both to be very successful adults who are utterly haunted by, by their culpability in a girl's death. And you said when you were describing the book so beautifully, you said there was this kind of like complicity or this sense of, we're not going to ever speak of this ever again. Not just outside of the walls of our home.
It's a pact.
But it's not, I mean, it's even,
It's an understanding.
I've thought a lot about who it was in the family who that was most important to. Because it's not like they all huddled together and were like, we're never gonna speak of this ever again. And Ben is in a way the most clear-eyed of all of them at that point. He knows what his culpability was, which is that when he ran to that car, he was running to that car as a father and not as a doctor. And he had to live with, it would have ended up the same way. It wasn't that he did anything that would have changed the fate of Misty Zimmerman, but he knows in his heart that when he ran over to that car, he wasn't thinking clearly, and he was thinking about saving his kids and not the Hippocratic Oath, right? And Sarah and Theo were teenagers, and to my mind, it's Mimi who, in her desire for everything to be lovely, and in Ben's love for her, in their bond, in the, families have their ways of accommodating each other, and the accommodation, and the kids were, they were fine with never talking about it again at that point, like maybe it would just go away, and instead it just it loomed larger and larger and larger for all of them. And to me, so it's a book about an aftermath, not about and one last thing, when I went back after those years, and I started in earnest again, I had not written the opening that I just read to you.
Oh, come on, I'm sorry. That was just what I was thinking, I'm sorry.
I had not.
What are you talking about?
I knew that there was something that happened at that tree. I knew that the neighborhood kids all referred to it as the magic tree because they didn't know the story of what had happened all those years before. I knew that Ben didn't like that they called it that, and that he had a real relationship with the magic tree that was not a happy one. I suspected that what happened at that tree involved the Wilf children, but I didn't know exactly what it was. And I write novels like...
You were like a neighbor coming up with a story looking at the tree. Like you didn't know. That's crazy. You know what I'm saying? It's like you were inhabiting the neighborhood.
And you, as the author, were like, I don't know whatever happened at that tree.
I knew
Something
that,
happened.
but I
Do you
knew
know what
that.
I mean by that?
But I knew that everything that happened. I knew that the way that Sarah was as an adult, and the way that Theo was as an adult, and we meet them as adults in 2010, had to do with what happened that night. I just didn't yet know.
How did you know how to write the future if you
I
don't
always
know
do that.
what had happened behind? Like
I
you
always do
made
that.
it up.
My novel Family History begins with a woman lying in bed watching home movies, and something has happened. Something has gone wrong in her family, and she's watching home movies and watching sort of images of her happy family, and you can feel that something has gone wrong and her family isn't happy anymore. I didn't yet know what it was that had happened. I wrote my way into that character of Rachel to come to learn. That was the discovery. I have also been very interested in what happens in a mystical sort of way, like what happens in place over time. So that tree for me, I mean, in my yoga practice, at home in Connecticut where I live, I for many years have looked out at this tree when I'm practicing. It's in our front meadow. It's an old poplar. And I remember once, and whenever I'm in tree pose, it's my drishti. I can say that because we're in LA. And one day I had the thought, this tree has been here long before we got here, and it's going to be here long after we leave. And that just interested me, you know,
Wait,
the
tree
idea
as witness?
Yeah.
The tree as a silent witness.
And place as witness, in a way. And one other piece, and again, this is an illustration of the writer being the last to know, but when we first moved to this small town in rural Connecticut where we live, right when we moved there, our son was like 3 years old, and there was this awful accident in the community, and a boy died on black ice, you know, on a just clear day. Nothing to do with the kind of accident that I wrote about at the beginning of Signal Fires. That's what happened. And every day I would drive my son to preschool up this winding road, and shortly after it happened, I saw the mother, and she was sitting by the utility pole where the car had crashed into, and she had a folding chair. She had like set herself up there, and she was there every day. And I would look for her, and she started planting things. She planted wildflowers. At Christmas time, she put up tinsel, and she was there every day. And it was heartbreaking, and years went by. And one day, because my son went to that school all the way to 8th grade, one day, she wasn't there anymore. And I registered that she wasn't there, and I never saw her there again. And she sort of haunted me. But I also had the thought at some point that other generations of young families would drive their kids up that road and not know what had happened at that utility pole. So where does the pain go? You know, where does the trauma go? Where does the heartache go? Does it just, does it exist somewhere? So these were things, and did I absolutely never once thought about that utility pole or that mother, or this was not a conscious thing. I thought about it well after I finished the book, and I thought, oh, it must have come from there and the yoga tree. But so when I went back to start writing again, I knew I had to write the opening. I knew I had to know exactly what had happened at that point when I finally returned during COVID to writing it. And all I knew when I began that prologue or that little piece is that I wanted it to start with the word and. I just knew that it needed to be in media res. It needed to
In what?
in media res, like it needed to be like already happening.
Media res. In media res.
In the middle of things.
In media res.
You like it?
It's my new stripper name. You got a tattoo. In media res. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I can't wait to discuss
Hi,
that word later.
I'm media res. But it needed to be it needed to already be happening.
That's heavy.
And that's all I knew. I knew that, and I knew one other thing, which is that I wanted the reader to feel like we are not in one moment in time. We are, you know, when we subconsciously know when we're reading the opening that Theo and Sarah are going to survive. You know, we're not thinking that probably, but we're knowing.
How do we know that?
Because Misty Zimmerman is the one who's like, if she lives through this night, she will be, you know. Theo, the scar, years from now, a lover will, you know, comment on the scar,
right.
you know. And Sarah, years from now, she will be unknowable to him. So we hopefully the reader's not reading like at that level, because then the reader's not inside of
In the
it.
flow, yeah.
Right. But I wanted there to be this sense that this was going to be a narrative where we would move around in time, so that the rules of engagement with the book are already being, we're already in it. You know, it's not changing its tune. It's not changing the rules of the way that we're meant to read. this particular story.
You might know it, but
It's my stripper name.
Yeah. It is so, to me, it's a revelation to hear you talk about this. Because it looks like, it looks, okay, I just felt like I was looking at a continuum in a way that I've never read. Maybe like, I don't remember what the Thornbirds were like. I don't know what happens in the old days when people would write about families over time. The complexity, the way you structured it, made me feel I am the daughter. I am now the mother. I'm now the daughter. I'm now the sister. I'm every woman. And I mean, I know when I'm talking the truth because all of my hair is standing up. There is something very like looking at the yearbook of what will they become? What are they most likely to do? But you're telling it to us in such, it's almost like you're taking us out to sea in a storm and we're getting like slivers of insight or, of course, the neurodiverse kid would of course be a but he was feeling outside, but then he's okay. And so you get to see this, I don't know, just, it's a very rolling experience for me. And I love this one thing you said at the end that I remember, I had to write this down, I had to listen to it, that grief, no one talks about how long it takes for the person you love to return to you as who they were before they became sick. That is beautiful. It is the idea of when you watch people decline or decay or to stop being who they were. And you can't remember, were they ever this other person? But because you're reading it and you're doing this like almost like a spirograph, you're just circling back and you're getting to have this insight into, and everyone's so good. There's nobody bad. It's just
some readers might disagree with you.
Really?
Who's
bad?
Some people have found Waldo's father Schenkman very difficult.
Oh, I found him to be so lost, so scared.
Yeah, I mean, I love Schenkman.
I mean, I just think they're all I have so much empathy for each person. So, have we had enough?
No.
It's counter, I mean, the writers in the room will totally get this. It's like, on the one hand, I'm the novelist, so I'm in control of these characters, right? So if I wanted Schenkman to do better, I could have Schenkman do better, except that's actually not true. And I was there kind of one step behind Schenkman as the narrator, the slightly omniscient, like layered narrator, thinking, oh, Schenkman, don't do that. Do better, Schenkman.
Yeah, right.
Even as I am creating Schenkman and creating the scene in which Schenkman is not doing better, I'm exhorting Schenkman to do better. And he, everything for him is out of love for his son and his fear that his kid is not quote unquote normal and is therefore going to have
his terror. He feels like it's his job.
Exactly.
To get him to have a better life.
Right.
To be a different person.
Right. To be a different person.
And how many people do you know?
Exactly.
Have maybe experienced that?
Well, the part when I was writing that part of the book and creating Schenkman, my kid was 11 and I was on the fields of lots of sporting games, let's say, and I was like, wow, parents, there's like, there's some I guess I was absorbing, some of that, like catch the ball, don't stand there and look up at the stars. So, but with that, should we open it up to questions?
You go.
Tool of illumination of the self, of the world. I discover things that I didn't know I knew, always, and so that's true with memoir. That's true with fiction. I mean, they're obviously very different genres, but that is the way that I write. Like, people have asked me, did I write all of the pieces of Signal Fires in one story and then chop them up and put them back together? And it's like, I cannot imagine working that way. It was one led to the next, and then led to the next. And that's been true of this kind of, and that was true of inheritance too. I mean, I had my process for inheritance, I had index cards all over my desk, and I thought for a while the book was going to be structured in 3 parts, and then it ended up needing to be structured in 4 parts. But I would write on these index cards and just be like, oh, I think this is in part 1. Oh, I think this is in part 4. I'll get to that later. Oh, I think, and those piles of index cards were what I would shuffle through every morning when I sat down to work. And sometimes there was something there, and sometimes there wasn't. Sometimes the next right thing revealed itself. Sometimes I had to sort of find it.
Because I got the when you are hooking into the collective unconscious, when you're meditating, when you're emptying your mind, did you feel that you were excavating things from your unconscious, or things that you were to know in the future, but because time can be so elastic, and it's that sliding doors? That's what I felt a lot in the book, was the sliding doors had one. You know, I could barely begin this book for so long because I was in an accident where people were killed. To me, reading that, I was like, I can't do this. I have to wait till I'm stronger. Because it doesn't matter how long it's been.
No.
It's just in
Right,
you.
right there. Yes.
Oh, it's always like it just
Yes.
happened.
Yes.
And like, I'd like the good things to feel that vibrant and alive, you know, just like, oh, that amazing day. You know, it's interesting how trauma settles in different people and how they're able to either overcome or sink into it and drown in it. And I don't understand how you did this. It's really quite a feat.
You started with, talking about meditation. I really do think that, for me, my meditation practice is a part of my writing practice. Not because I have eureka, great insight moments while I'm meditating necessarily, most of the time not at all, but it quiets my mind. And in quieting my mind, that's what begins to allow for the possibility of something coming in. A noisy mind just doesn't have, there's no room. So, I think when I'm meditating, I'm really sort of priming my instrument. I'm polishing my instrument so that I can be a witness
And a conduit, because you're definitely conduiting in this thing. Don't you find?
Well, I always feel that way. When I finish a book, I feel like I don't know how I did that, and I don't know how I'll ever do that again. Always, because I won't do that again. If whatever I do next, it'll be. It's a new mountain. You don't know the terrain of that mountain. You haven't climbed that mountain, even if and it's dangerous to think, well, I climbed that other mountain, so I know how to climb this mountain. We don't. So it's always, it's beginner's mind. It's begin again. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This was amazing.